Hello and welcome back to In Between Generations with Dr. Lena and
Dad.
this is episode 3. So hopefully you have heard episode 1 and episode 2 and you have enjoyed your time with us. This episode we will be discussing fatherhood versus then and now, where my father will tell you a little bit about his fatherhood journey as well as his career and what makes him an expert, quite frankly, in the field of fatherhood. So, as I mentioned before, prior to my dad, his illness, as well as him retiring, he worked at the Franklin Center where we live. And during that time, he and his late cousin worked on several programs that have had a great impact over the community. And we'll share a little bit more about some of those things. But specifically, they had a fatherhood initiative where they worked with young males and fathers. And they did some counseling as well as just creating a safe space for young men that were Black who could come and just kind of talk and get some advice sometimes from another man who looked like them and had very similar experiences. So I'll let my dad share a little bit about what that role was like, and then we'll get into some questions. So tell us a little bit about the Fatherhood Initiative programs that you all had down there.
Well, the Fatherhood Initiative was actually created, I think, by my late cousin. He worked there for several years before I came. But we just wanted to reach young men so that they could mature and grow into adult men in a positive way, and men in general who are having difficulties. We work with them as well. And it's gratifying because recently I've seen the young men we work with, and they're 18, 19 now. Some of them have gone off to college. Some trying to get into the trades, but of course they know me. But I'm looking at them saying, well, you don't remember me, do you? You know, I'm Prince. Oh, hey, Prince. You know, kind of embarrassing. But we saw so many young men. Our young men's group was called Males, Maturing, Achieving, Leading, Empowering Self. No, Learning, Empowering Self, I'm sorry. The acronym we use for it. And we did all sorts of things. We went to the wonderful thing is we exposed these young men to stuff in my neighborhood anyway they'd never been exposed to. We took them to a symphony one time, and it was crazy. They loved it. Because none of them I don't think had ever really heard live music besides maybe a band in a juke joint type of place setting. But nobody had ever heard them play classical style music, so that was great. And the funny thing is, there was an older white lady sitting in front of us, and they were real great behaved. She said, "How do you keep them so well behaved?" I said, "We beat them." So she looked. I said, "I'm kidding, man." Because her eyes that big, but all sorts of stuff. We would go and play laser tag, various things. And the main thing is, we had a session every week where we talked about manhood and about treating people properly and treating each other with respect. And we would watch a video sometimes there. Never done a video. It's like it was something like a video cassette, I guess. Like,
Okay.
But that's for me. That was an important job. It may have been the most important job I've ever had. And for the last 30 years at least, I've worked in human services. But that job, because I know I'm affected in some of the future. As for the grown men, it mostly was marriages who are on the brink of separation or divorce, and some that are already divorced. And of course, mom and dad are fighting over sometimes custody of the kid, fighting over who has the kid, all kinds of stuff. And you may have heard me say this before. What I had to deal with a lot was a parent who bad-mouthed the other parent when the kid was with them. Don't do that. Don't ever do that. Bad thing. Because mark my words, when they're little, you might not get anything out of them. As far as what's going on with that. But as they grow, they'll grow to resent the other parent. They'll grow to resent you if you're criticizing the other parent. Always remember this: kids love their parents. Dad could be a bum on Skid Row, they still love him. Don't think they don't. They may act like they're angry and the rest of that, but I've seen it too many times. They love their dad and their mom, of course. So don't badmouth the other parent. But we did all kinds of stuff for Franklin Center with those guys. We had them arrange a debate about gun laws, and they debated each other. They learned a great deal from just being there, and they got to experience some things that they may experience later on in college, or that they never would have otherwise. So it was just a great experience for me, and it's, like I said, it's rewarding when you see even one of the grown men that I counsel. When you see one of them, and they, you can tell how they talk to you that they're grateful. Some of them will tell you flat out, if it hadn't been for you, so wonderful.
Great, thank you for that. So we'll get into some questions more about fatherhood in general. Like I said, today we're talking about fatherhood versus then and now. And so just some general questions. How was fatherhood different when you were raising me? Or even my cousins, right? Because you did a lot of raising of not just me. I know this is a podcast about us, but my family is a large family, if you know us, and my father has been in this family long before all of us, I think, were born. He and my mom have been together since they were in high school. So I'll rephrase that question and say, how was fatherhood when you were raising all of us?
Well, like most father types, I'm from an era where, let me give you this and it may come up in another question. I'm from an era when men went to work, kind of rearing the kids were pretty much mom's duty. And so I was more of a hands-on, I think, even with the boys, because it's usually what it is, you got dad who's protective and dotes on his daughter, but he wants to, from my era anyway, but he wants to toughen up his son, because his son's got to grow up one day and go to work and handle the bills and whatever else. He's the provider and protector, so you kind of, and you may still witness this sometimes, you kind of, with the boys, but you don't do that with your daughters. And so that's the era I come from. But, several of my nephews I helped to raise, and they all pretty much turned out to be fine young men. Well, some of them, like she said, 40 and 50 now, between 40 and 50. But that's one of the main differences. We treated the girls much differently than they are now, I think. Now the girls are like, they're like dudes. If you step to them, they're gonna bust your side of the head just like one of the males would. But I think that's one of the primary differences.
Okay.
That's why, and I never thought of it in that way with my own child. I just wanted to have a closeness and a bond. So that's why when we went places, she was there with me as much as possible.
What pressures did fathers face then?
Again, providing for the family, because we come from a little steel town. There was a steel manufacturer called Jones and Laughlin that influenced the whole valley. Matter of fact, influenced the whole southwest Pennsylvania. They used to put out tons and tons of steel that went around the world. At one point, there was 17,000 men that worked there. They came from different parts of Pennsylvania to work there. But if it was a prize. You were big time if you had a job in the mill. See, that when I was young, a lot of men's goal was to graduate high school and go work in the mill and retire from the mill, because they paid good money. And at that time, all the overtime you wanted. There's some guys that stayed down there around the clock that had families, because they knew when they went home, that paycheck would be fat. So Dad wasn't, in a lot of households, Dad wasn't around that much. he wasn't working, he was sleeping, or having a little taste, because because you have men who they're not drunks, but they like to get together with their boys and have a little taste. But I think that's one of the primary differences. One thing I hated that I had to witness, the mill shut down, but it ruined a lot of lives when that mill went down. It supported and built up a whole lot of lives when it was at full speed, but when it closed down, many families suffered. Many families.
Speaking of that, I think my next question kind of plays into what you're discussing. So things were great, folks had a job, men felt like they were providing, all was well. But in regards to emotions, what were men back in the day when you were growing up, right? What were their emotions like? Were they encouraged to express emotions? I mean, I think I know the answer to that. I think your story tells a little bit into that, but explicitly share with us what it was like being a young man, being a father, and how that, how you were able to show emotions or not.
Well, there's always the exception, but the rule basically was when I was coming up, and of course, when you're young, you bring it out of the baggage with you, is men didn't show their emotions. Very rarely. In my neighborhood, we thought that a real man was somebody that could handle himself in a fight, was good with the ladies, and had a nice car, and dressed nice. That's what a man was, which we know is ridiculous. But that's what we thought. Mm-hmm. And some of these guys that did that were actually wine heads. They had a nice car and clothes. That's what they spent the money they ever got on. And but when I look back, I'm saying he was a bum. But we looked up to him, especially if they could fight well. And my neighborhood was rough. My neighborhood was designated the roughest neighborhood in my town. People were scared to come through, and it was just. But I loved it because all my relatives were there. I felt covered like a blanket. But I saw fights every other day. I mean, knockdown, drag out fights. And then I saw guys, which is different than men now. They fight, shed a little blood, and then shake hands afterwards. But you don't see that anymore.
No.
Folk want to get a gun and kill you if you win the fight.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was just different for men then, because like I said earlier, you went and worked, and if it was anything else, it's kind of like you see on some of the old sitcoms, and even now, if mamas couldn't discipline you, or you wouldn't accept mama's discipline, then dad stepped in. That's how that went. But most people, and this is mostly with boys, because the girls from my time, they probably snuck around and done stuff, but they weren't blatant like the girls now. Nah, they wouldn't want their mother or their father, and especially their father, to know they were doing something extra. But that was the taboo. The father was just working and providing, and he spent some time maybe when he was off or on a weekend, because some guys worked a straight week shift. He spent some time, and you had good father and daughter relationships, but you had some who weren't so good, of course, like anything. But it was just different. Now a father don't know his daughter, or if he spends a whole lot of time with his baby girl, it's not looked upon as something so terrible. It wasn't looked that terrible then. It was like soft, I guess is the word. Mm-hmm. You were soft if you were doing it. If you were at home cooking or washing the dishes, taking care of a kid, even if you had a good woman and she was in the house, you were soft. If one of your boys came in and saw that, it'd be like, what in the world is this? Yeah. But that's a big difference, I think.
Yeah, and I would say my dad definitely was, I always tell people a lot that my dad was not what typical, or like he is describing as like what people thought men were or dads were back in the day. I learned how to cook a lot from my dad. I learned how to put a mean crease in a pair of pants from my dad. I learned some cleaning from my dad. My dad prepared a lot of meals for me. My mom worked in the city when I was growing up, and so she needed to commute a lot earlier. So my dad was usually the person who was with me in the morning and in the afternoon before my mom came home. So there were just a lot of things that my dad taught me, and he was in my life in ways that I think a lot of folks didn't have their dad. I think even growing up in the 90s and the 80s, there was still a lot of men who were just going to work and just providing financially for their kids. And my dad was doing all of those things. He was financially contributing because he went to work, but then also was teaching me things, life skills, and hanging out with me. So I would say for sure he was not in that conventional role. I think that impacts, also how I have relationships and how I enter relationships. I expect that if I'm in a partnership with someone that they also do those things. I'm not gonna just cook and clean. I actually prefer someone who can cook.
I wonder.
But that is, I think, the difference in my household when I think about other friends that I had, and I would see the relationships that their parents had. It is not traditional in that sense. But then my dad would do the things like take out the trash and do those things. So we have talked a little bit about those typical or stereotypical gender roles and expectations of men when you were growing up and when you were raising me and my cousins. I want to talk a little bit about now. Parents in my generation, me, Eric, Shar, Bria, right? Or Ms., don't want to get it wrong. What are some things that you think we do better as parents than you did or parents back in the day did?
That's a good question. I think in a sense, this could be interpreted as good or bad. I think you talked about me and your relationship, but I think overall that you guys relate better to your kids than when I was coming up. As far as the grown-ups knew when I was growing up, is you came home, did whatever chores they had for you, and then you could go out and play until X time. Everybody, when street lights we had, when they came on, you better be on the porch or right in front of the house, because you get a serious licking. Okay, if you didn't. Now, parents were more controlling, but really didn't know as much about their kids did, because they didn't. Like I talked about, she and I going places together. Nah. Matter of fact, I was raised by 5 women. You probably heard me say that before on his, I think. I wouldn't know my dad if he walked in the room, but I had an uncle who I looked up to as a father figure. But I don't ever remember them going to anything. I mean, we'll get to my mom, but even my mom, because, I was inducted into the National Honor Society from school. I practiced karate for a number of years and won a bunch of trophies. She wasn't there for any of it. Best supporting actor in our senior class play, but it's all good because my mom didn't go, but as soon as I accomplished something, she'd run out on our street, it was Oakwood Street. Look at my baby's report card. What do you want, Which is cool, but I would have wanted her to be there or something, But that's a huge difference, I think. Now I think you guys, I look at my daughter, you guys are definitely much more connected to what he's doing in school, who his friends are, Yeah, definitely. My mom had to beat me one time because of one friend I had. One friend, when he was dangerous. We go in the store, he's stealing candy bars, right? Back then you had a device on telephone poles, on the poles, a little red box. If you pulled it, fire alarm went off, and everybody in the community came out, and the firemen too. And that was a safety deal, right? Because if they knew it was a fire, it might be near them. But it had one of those ultra glow substances on it, I guess. And they started looking around, because somebody said it might be one of them bad ass kids. You know how that's going up. So the firemen start shining that light on his hands, and sure enough, it was my boy Timmy. And I don't know where my mother came from, how she knew. Somebody told her Timmy was there because she knew what Timmy was at that time. I probably was with him. She just started beating me and chased me home. That's when she could outrun me too. When I was probably 10, 11. But yeah, it was just different because, like I said, you guys, I guess, they have to give you credit. The ones I know anyway pay more attention to their kids now and what their kids are doing. They may not be able to solve their problems. The kid may stay rebellious or whatever, but at least they are aware. You know, my aunt, they helped raise me, my grandmother, great-grandmother, they wouldn't know. Mom, the only one that might have an inkling was my mom, is because she was out there for a bit. I don't mean in a nasty way, because she worked a job, but on the weekends, she liked to knock them back too. So, but nobody didn't know what we was doing. So that's a difference. That's a huge difference. Don't get it twisted. For you to be involved, and you may not even talk to your kids about anything you find out, you discover. But just being involved, knowing what your kid is doing, makes a huge difference.
Yeah. What do you think of this generation or that we struggle with as parents?
Well, I'm going to say this because it's old-fashioned. It's something me and my daughter go around and around about. And my grandson. Discipline is one. You know, I'm from a generation where, you know, you did what you was told and not you got a beating. So now, I don't see that happening a lot. And I see kids were allowed to express themselves. You couldn't express yourself at all. Even if you tried to do it in a respectful way, they didn't want to hear it.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't want to hear it. And so we learned this. The only thing you said is yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. I mean, you might be steaming, but that's all you said. Because I used to get it or get yelled at, and then I go down the street and throw rocks and kick dirt and cuss. And then I look around and start cussing because in my neighborhood, everybody knew everybody. The families knew everybody. And one of them old girls might be in the window. I heard you this, but I'm calling Hazel, you know. I'm like, oh man, now I'm gonna get a beating. She just yelled at me before, but that's a huge difference. I mean, if you were an adult, you were always right. Because if you said no, I didn't do it. Miss So and so said she saw you. Oh, so she lying, huh? They hate it for you. They hate it for you. That's what I said, but that's what they infer from that. Oh, so Miss So and so lying, huh? Get over here. You know, it was one of them things. Yeah, so that's a huge difference. Yeah.
Anything else you want to add to that? Or?
No, it'll come up in the question probably.
Yeah.
Because I'm being all over the place.
No, it's all good. What about affection? How has affection changed from when you were a child? You know what? Let me ask that in a better way. Share a little bit about the affection maybe you received as a child, and then share about the affection you gave me, and then what you think overall, how parents show affection to their children now. Kind of like a little bit of an evolution.
Yeah, I think the way I was raised as a child contributed to the way our relationship was, because, like I said, they didn't go anywhere with you. They weren't affectionate too much. Sometimes, when they had a little taste, they'd come here and give me a hug, but no, they weren't affectionate. Here's what you're supposed to be doing. Do it, or you know the consequences. That was basically the atmosphere. Now, I'm not telling you like I loved my relatives any less, but it's just that's how it was. Now, and the craziest thing seen today, I see parents being more affectionate than mine ever was with me. I just told you my daughter, Lord, how my mother never showed for anything. And she was not affectionate until one time she broke her leg in 2 or 3 places and she couldn't walk. She's laid up. And then that's when we grew closer. Matter of fact, here's a crazy fact. I used to call my mother by her first name. My grandmother had me so much as an infant when I was growing up, I called her mom and I called my mother Hazel. Until that happened. When they broke her leg, we spent a lot of time together over those several months. And then we bonded more. But that was different. You couldn't come and ask your elders about anything. That's the huge difference in my mind.
Yeah, and so then how did you show affection to me, or how did that impact how you showed affection towards me?
Because I, subconsciously and consciously, I think, was determined that I wouldn't raise you that way. You probably heard me say before, I made myself a promise when I knew my wife was pregnant. I'm going to be an example for my daughter. I'm not going to yell at her and tell her, get yours, do that. I want to be an example. And I remember when it first hit me, she was an infant. No, she wasn't an infant. She was like 2 or 3 maybe. And we were driving somewhere, and I said, put your seatbelt on, baby. And then that voice in my head said, you said you would be an example, put your seatbelt on. Mm-hmm. And from that point on, I wouldn't tell her to do nothing that I wouldn't do. We just try to lord over it. I'm dad. You do it because I say do it. And that was one of my mother's favorite sayings. You don't do what I do, you do what I say do. She laughed because her and her grandmother were close. But yeah, she'll tell you that in a minute. So that's huge. That's huge. Always remember this. And I think I may have said it already. But you can yell at your kids, and some kids probably today, and some of them are going to be totally defiant no matter what. But back in my day, you could yell at a kid and have him do what you want him to do, or beat him. But that only lasts so long. When they get older, when they become teenagers, that ain't gonna work. They're gonna do what they saw modeled in their home. Because my cousin Vivian, my aunt used to beat the crap out of her. And with anything she had her hands on. Vivian was pretty fast and she'd run to, because that's why I always say my aunt Date, who raised us, the only person I know who could throw a shoe around the corner. Because she would throw stuff in, but Vivian would take off. She's a wild child. But that's just, for been some modeling, it was always the violent stuff. Now, as far as that goes, I got the fierce whippings from my grandmother, and my great-grandmother, and my great-grandmother. But my grandmother kept me all the time up until a certain age when my mother worked. But that stuck out in my mind. You couldn't even ask for knowledge that probably was going to improve you. I know some of it is embarrassment because they didn't understand how the money system worked. They didn't know. All the people in my family, men and women, I don't think any of them, we were originally from Georgia, I don't think any of them graduated high school. They just didn't know. And there's an embarrassment that comes with not knowing. Because parents are supposed to know everything, right? Especially from my era, you got to answer to everything. Well, not true.
So, as we continue into some of our final questions, how did becoming a father change you? So you mentioned before you wanted to be an example, but what other things do you think shifted when you became a parent?
I think I became a little more steady. Let me tell you this about myself. I was never a drinker. Only time I was drunk is when I had to chug a fifth of Chiaffa after I went over in Alpha Phi Alpha at Northwestern University. But I was all over the place. My mother used to say, jack of all trades, master of none, then some cuss words in there, but I won't do that. But if something interests me, I was on it. And I ain't bragging, but most stuff I achieved a certain mastery over relatively quickly. So then I went to something else. and something else. And she made me more steady. When I worked first at a job called Allegheny Valley School, when I worked with special needs, and then another special needs job at this place called Passivant. But then, guys would ask me stuff, like we're talking about counseling. So then I made sure I got the certificates that I needed to do that. But before that, in my 20s, even my early 30s, I was all over the place. I mean, I had a great time, but if you do this and drop out, I was at Northwestern, primarily on scholarship. Then I went in the Navy. And of course, in the Navy, I went crazy. Like I said, I wasn't a drinker, but me and my boy, every evening we was downtown hooping it up in San Diego. So that I have some regret about, because if I played music for, you heard my daughter say, yeah, if I had kept up with my horn, I don't know, I might have been a celebrity. You don't know. But from that to this to that to that to that to that, I think that's one character trait of mine that I'm not proud of. Because I see different people from different phases of my life, and they say, yeah, man, you still play that horn? No. I mean, you still practicing karate? No. That kind of stuff. But, as my wife likes to say, it is what it is. Things turned out good. Things turned out good. And this one over here, she turned out great. So.
In our last question, before we get into just some, not debate questions, but just some kind of wrapping up questions, what was the hardest part about being a dad?
Well, you were a great kid, so it wasn't too much that was hard. But I always worried about, and I do this with my grandson. I always tell him, stay because I don't want him to do what I did. Because he's multi-talented too. Already, we could tell at 12. Don't do what I did, jumping around, experimenting, find out what it is you truly love and dig in. But I guess the thing is, give me the question again.
The hardest part of parenting.
Oh, see, there was so much that was hard. But probably, believe it or not, because when a dad feels like I feel, even now I call her my baby. You'll always be my baby. But when you see you growing into womanhood and doing the things that women typically do, that's hard. I mean, I would never, normally say that to you, but it is. Because you're my baby in my heart, but you ain't my baby no more.
Yeah.
And see, that's the thing, I'm going to get into this, but about marriage. People don't understand. People get married. Oh, let's get married. I had a baby, get married. Nah. A man, when they say giving your daughter away in marriage, that's a man gives his daughter to another man. And there's only one real requirement of that man, that he treat her like you would. If he's not doing that, kick him to the curb. I'm telling you, that's the requirement. And so that's what it was, walking her. But I'm so proud of it, man. And I always try to steer her place. I'm still doing a dad thing. I'm trying to always steer her places because, she had a master's and a doctorate, and we did this podcast because I'd be saying that, it'd be great if we, you could, if you finish and get that PhD, when you write the book, it's going to, I know she gets sick of me doing that sometimes, but it's because I love her so much.
All right, so some debate questions, kind of similar to our this or that from our previous episode. Are kids today softer or just more emotionally aware?
In some ways, I'd say softer. Now, these kids may be emotionally aware, but softer in that like I said, we had to figure stuff out for ourselves. You couldn't go to your parents. Because either, like I said, they didn't know, or they didn't want you to know about how money works. So you had to figure it out. And if you blundered the wrong way when you're figuring out, they're the ones that would chastise you. So, yeah, you made a mistake. But I think that's a huge difference. We just weren't allowed to talk about certain things.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny, on the internet you see a lot about people are saying, when I was 12, I was doing blah, 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 blah. And my daughter is in the bathroom having a bubble bath or something like that. But I do think it's different. Because even when I was growing up, y'all didn't necessarily know what we were doing down the street.
That's right.
You knew who our general friends were, but Langston asked me once, he said, so you would just be outside all day?
All day.
And your parents didn't know where you were? And I was like, no, they knew generally that we were outside, that we were down the street. I said, but sometimes we went to the other side. And they didn't know we was there till I called from my cousin's house and be like, oh, I'm at Brandy's house. And then we'd be over there. Then we walk back or we go to the store. There was no way for us to tell our parents where we were going or what we were doing because there were no cell phones to call. So I do think it's not softer in a negative connotation, but they do much have softer lives than we did.
Oh, no
and
doubt.
I know I had a much softer life than you did. But for sure, it has gotten softer and softer for the children. My dad didn't go on vacations. I went on a vacation every year. I didn't have a passport until I took myself to Greece with my homies. But Langston, boy, been to Aruba. He been to the Bahamas, to Atlantis. That was my first time too. I did, take him because I wanted to go. He's been to Jamaica for his birthday in a cabana. I think he was 8, 9. I don't know. Maybe he was 10. But at any rate, right? He has these passport stamps and things that I never had. So they certainly have a softer life. But I also do think that there is some more emotional awareness because to the point that you made, we do have more conversations, right? I had more conversations than you had. Langston and I certainly have far more conversations than I had with you and Mommy. So I definitely see that there is that evolution. But yeah, it's a lot different. It's a lot different. And also I had said this to Langston the other day. He was saying something about oh, you're not tough, Mom. I said, have you ever skinned the entire side of your leg? Never. I don't even think Langston has ever scratched a knee. Right. So they are even physically a little softer too, because I've at least scuffed some knees, fallen into gravel and cut up my leg. He's not. The children, they ain't really outside no more. They're not really outside.
That's the key.
They're inside, and inside is soft and air conditioned, and yeah. So it's different. Yeah. Definitely a different time.
And what she said is key. Even during the school time, the first thing you did, come home, the schoolwork ready to get done. Then can I go outside? Gone. And then, like I said, when nights fall, you should be back. And in the summertime, you might have some breakfast, and they chase you out of there. All right, get on out and play. Mm-hmm. And then they had to call you back home. Mm-hmm. But and the great thing about my neighborhood, it's almost like one of my relatives, I told you about my great-grandmother, was strategically placed. It would seem like that. So wherever I was in my neighborhood, if my dad or my mom started calling me, it was a short relay. Sometimes I could hear them where I was. And I'd take off and come home. But it's definitely different. Because if you play outside all day, you're going to get cut. I can't tell you, maybe that we'll just talk about in another episode. I bust my head open, almost could have lost the eye. I cut my own self several times. My mother had one of those rolling knife sharpeners, and it had the files on the handle of it. On the blade of it, and I wiped it across my leg. Cut my thigh wide open. But if I used my grandfather's razor, that's when they had a double edge. Cut my face wide open. But I was always messing with something I shouldn't have. That's all. Or doing something, trying something. And then when I was a kid, you better not dare somebody to do something. They jump off a 10-story building. I dare you. You a punk. And there you go. You know. But that's just how it was.
Is parenting harder now or back then?
Oh, I think now, no doubt. I mean, you got so much to contend with, from cell phones and other crazy stuff and the drugs. We didn't have that. You had some drinkers, and you had some dudes that snuck a little marijuana now and then, but that's it. Yeah. All these fancy drugs and and the ease with which you can get them. And like you said, we had telephones. You gotta have dial, and if you wasn't near a phone, it was a problem. So let's say you was on the highway, because I've seen this happen, on the turnpike, and your car break down. You can't call nobody.
Yeah.
Can't call the police. Can't call no family member. Can't call now some nice person come by and help you out. But yeah, see, and that's one that I think about. I'm saying, like, how do we go through that?
Yeah.
Because if you were somewhere by yourself, you was helpless.
Yeah. I definitely that's something we can get into, talking about some of the technologies that we have now that get you there. But I think I would say there's definitely a lot more to contend with, but I think parenting may be hard for different reasons now than back then. Like you said, there is so much technology and access that young people have that I didn't even have as a child, and you certainly didn't have. But then also when we talked about just about the safety, again, not saying that it is safe in America for Black people or brown people or minoritized folks, but it is still so much different than it was back then than it is now. Similar in some ways, but also still different because we have some access to things that we didn't have access to before, right? Like sitting in the wrong seat at a restaurant could get you beat down.
Yep.
That's not necessarily the case anymore, right? Obviously, there's some places we don't want to show up to or be at, but by and large, if I want to go to Eaton Park, I can go down to Eaton Park and I can sit in any seat that's available. I don't have to go through the back door or do some of those things, right?
Absolutely.
So I do think parenting may have been harder in different times for different reasons, but I definitely do think that technology is something else, because even when you try your best to see what your kid is doing and know what they're doing, they can have access to people and people can have access to them a lot faster. So I do think we should definitely get into some of that, and we can talk about safety in using technology, because I think that is a debate that a lot of folks get into about how much technology you let your kid have access to, and what do you allow them to do and not. And so I definitely think that's something we can get into in a future episode, because I certainly have a lot to say, and I know your thoughts and views might be a little bit different, and we can kind of talk through the who's and the whys for sure.
Because I'll talk later about how I think my generation, how if the people that raised me, if they had that technology.
Yeah, for sure. And then what parenting trend or thing that parents do now confuses you?
I don't know if what parents do now confuses me, but it's just, I guess you could say that, because some stuff, you gotta understand when I came up, how totally different it was. And some stuff I see parents doing, I'm saying like, how in the world? What the world are they doing, Like kids, I know some kids who don't have a job, but the parents just feed them money. And that could be, because you got money, you can do just about anything.
Yeah.
Not so when I was a kid, man, you could do something for somebody, hustle up a little money. I used to deposit pop bottles, I don't think they even do that anymore.
Oh, in New York they do.
Yeah, you take pop bottles. I think, what do we get for them? 2 cents a piece?
I think it's 5 and 10 cents now.
I do that all week so I can get 50 cents to go to a double matinee at our theater. But stuff like that, they weren't giving up money. Only time they would give you money is when they start drinking and get drunk. And you know, come on out here and show them what you can do, baby. You know, and then one of my other cousins be there. Here, I'll give you $1 if you burn him. They out there dancing, Canada. Oh, we dance all day for that $1.
Which is funny because they still did that when we was kids. They would have kids dancing and battling and stuff like that. Yeah.
So you know, it's those kind of things. But I don't know. The parents are inherently different. They just have a different approach to things, and it's because either from neglect or because you still got some dads around. Don't get it wrong, some dads and moms, especially men, who dote on their kids. Because I see one guy who lives near where my church is, and he was a great kid. He just was struggling. Couldn't get a job. His ex was all over him, but he got his kids, his 2 boys, every weekend, and they was doing stuff. Because I said, Brian, what's up now? Oh, I'm taking the boys to this, I'm taking the boys to that. And I see him by the church. And the little one, Mike, he'd always take off running. He'd have to stop running, because he wouldn't want him running the street. But he had that kind of relationship. So that part is significant, but you don't see it as much. It's too many absent dads. Too many. And we helped a lot of them, I could say. Me and Sean and Perry Mason. Who's Perry Mason? Perry Mason was this guy. I don't know if he worked for Child Services, but I can't think of his real name. This guy, they said, oh, you ought to get so-and-so, because I was helping one of the men. He ain't never lost a case. I'm saying like, yeah, right, Perry Mason, right? Man, that dude, this guy had 5 kids. He had a shooting on his record where he had shot somebody and didn't die or nothing, but and he didn't have a house that's suitable, because you get your kids are under CYS or whatever child agency, they gotta have room for each kid. If you can't have 3 kids sleeping in one room. They will not give you your kids in those circumstances. Here in Pennsylvania anyway. So this guy was able to help him arrange all of that. So then I took my hat to him and bowed. You are Perry Mason. Because I just knew he wasn't going to be able to help this brother. Because I said, yeah, this dude got all kind of crazy stuff, Yeah. Yeah, so that's the difference.
Any parting words to fathers who maybe find themselves in a rut or want to, similarly to what we discussed last time, who want to try to turn over a new leaf and do a little better?
You're going to hear me say this over and over, maybe somewhere in each one of these podcasts. Number one thing that turns a lot of dads around is that you got the mother-in-law and big mom and the wife and everybody else telling him he's trifling and he's not a good dad. There's only one indicator of whether a man's a good dad, and that's if your kids tell you they love you, they hug your neck, if they light up when you come in the room. Forget all that. Don't matter. Your kids are the barometer, right? Kids. Yeah. And even when you're a bum and act like they hate you, believe me, they still love you. One of my nephews, who shall not say his name, his mother has been, out there for a long time. But in the wintertime, when it's cold and freezing, he has gone out himself and brought his mom to his house. I mean, they don't get along, but that's still mom. Remember that, all you parents.
All right, so with that being said, we will end here. Thank you for tuning in to episode 3. We look forward to our next episode. He doesn't know this until I say it now, but we'll be discussing music.
Uh-oh. You have to shut it down once I get to run my mouth about music.
So,
jazz.
Strap in. We're excited. We both love music, so there will be some exciting conversations, some sharing of some of our favorites. So thank you again for joining us for In Between Generations, and we look forward to seeing you soon.